Good evening. We've been waiting for you. Please, do come in. Welcome to the Woodland Opera House. My name is Roger McDonald. I'm so glad you could join me on this very auspicious weekend. Halloween is one of my favorite times to visit the Woodland Opera House. You see, it's long been known that this beautiful old building is home to a ghost. Oh, how he loves Halloween. In fact, for over 100 years, this has been his favorite time, but we won't talk about that just yet. Tonight we celebrate the wonderful tradition of storytelling, the ancient art form that on this night invites us to journey into our imaginations, where witches and spirits, ghosts and goblins come alive through words. The only question you need ask yourselves is it real? Come on. Our first storyteller is a high school teacher whose stories have won many awards at some of the most prestigious storytelling competitions. But tonight, Brandon dips into his own experiences, calling up two tales that will leave you chilled to the bone. The first tells the tale of an encounter with an ancient spirit queen, who some say still rules the deepest seas of the Indian Ocean. Brandon Spars tells us the story and his personal encounter with Loro Kidul.
The waters of the Indonesian archipelago are haunted by a fearsome South Seas goddess. Her name, Loro Kidul. Now, Loro Kidul can take on three forms. One, a beautiful, seductive young woman. Two, a creepy, gnarled old hag. And three, an enormous, fierce serpent. In Indonesia, there's a superstition. You should never wear green when swimming on a south-facing beach. For if you do, she's likely to sneak up under you and snatch you and pull you under, and you'll never be seen again. Now, I don't take too much stock in superstitions, but this one, I just might believe, because I just may have had an encounter with none other than Loro Kidul herself. This was 30 years ago. I was living and working as a volunteer English teacher in Indonesia. I was taking a ferry from the island of Sumatra all the way to the island of Bali, a journey that should have taken about 27 hours. When I boarded the ferry, I signed my name on the ship manifest right next to number 93. And I remember that because when I got into the hull of the ship, there in capital letters written in English were the words, maximum capacity, 50 persons. I began to count, and I stopped at 200 passengers. At the time, I simply chuckled. I was in my early 20s, and this is part of what I found so thrilling, exhilarating even, about living in Indonesia, a total disregard for petty regulations such as maximum capacity limits. Well, just 6.5 hours into our journey, it happened. What do you expect to happen when you have 200 people on a boat that's only supposed to hold 50? the toilet jams. Now, the toilet wasn't much more than a hole in the deck of the ship leading through a pipe directly into the ocean. I had tried to use the toilet, and whoa, I couldn't even find the hole. It was buried under a mound of human sewage. She caught my attention as she paced to and fro in front of the bathroom. She was young and beautiful. She wore a shimmering white hijab with a matching gown. I knew she had to go to the bathroom, and finally, she slipped inside. Now, when two waves meet, they don't cancel each other out. They add together. It's physics. There must have been a wave from the front of the ship and one from the back, and they must have met directly under that sewer pipe because the doors of the bathroom were nearly blown off its hinges. And a briny mist filled the hull. The passengers began to cough and gag, and then, coming out of the mist, no longer white, was the woman. I remember how she stood there a moment, completely still, her arms outstretched, her mouth agape. A strand of human sewage hung from her upper lip and slowly connected to the lower. Some of us rushed up to help her, but whoa! She was covered in human bowel movements. Then, probably in shock and just seeking help, she began to come at us, wailing. "Ah!" And when she neared us, we all surged around her to the other side of the hull, whereupon slowly, like a reanimated corpse, she pivoted and made her new approach. "Ah!" And when she neared us, we surged around her again to the other side. What we didn't realize was what was happening up at the helm of the ship. With 200 people moving from side to side to side, we had completely overpowered the steering system, causing the boat to spiral dangerously off course. No one had ever experienced this before. But we all knew what was happening when it happened. The entire boat began to shiver and tremble. There was a sickening grating sound, and then we lurched to a complete standstill. We had run aground. Sure enough, when we opened the doors to the hull of the ship, framed in the doorway was a tiny island, one of the many that make up Pulau Seribu, the 1,000 islands, most of which don't even have names, just numbers, most of which are completely uninhabited. We went into an evacuation protocol, making a chain of people from the boat to the beach. And because it was so treacherous, when we got to the beach, we lined up for a head count. We all held our breath as the captain counted the passengers. It turned out the manifest had 273 names on it. If the captain came up with 272, one person hadn't made it through the raging surf. If two people, 271, we had lost two. Well, nobody was ready for the number he kept coming up with. 274 people. That meant one of two things. Either someone had not signed their name and paid for their fare, or two, somehow between the boat and the beach, someone had joined our party. The captain assumed the former, demanding to know, all right, who hadn't paid for their ticket? Well, the person in question made herself known almost immediately. Everyone backed away. And right there in our midst was an incredibly old woman, stooped so low it was like she was on all fours, with dark wrinkles on a face that was nearly simian, deep set eyes. Her strands of hair hung down and blended with what were once maybe shreds of clothing. "Were you on our boat?" the captain demanded. She heard him, and she didn't hear him. "Do you live here?" he asked. There were no structures. There was no source of water. She held up a crooked finger and pointed right at him. She laughed. "Kau semua akan mati. You're all gonna die." And with that, she bounded surprisingly quickly across the sand to the woods at the edge of the beach. We were all unsettled by the woman's appearance. The captain went about the business of examining the hull of the ship. The tide came in, the boat lifted up, and he determined it was unsafe for the passengers to reboard. He left a crew member with us. He radioed our position for a rescue, and then we all watched as the ferry disappeared over the horizon. The sun began to set, and with it, so disappeared our hopes. A wind came up. We built a fire and all huddled in close. No one wanted to admit it, but it soon became undeniable. Woven in with the wind was a human voice. "Tolong saya, tolong, help me, help me." A group of elderly women grabbed the shipmate and told him, "It's that woman in the woods. Go see what she wants." They thrust a burning branch into his arms and pushed him in the direction of the woods where the voice was coming. We all watched as the flame from that branch disappeared to reappear intermittently as he moved through the trees. And then there were 2 flames, and then 3, and then one big flame. And then the shipmate came running out, shouting, "Happy fire!" He had lit the woods on fire. And because it was the dry season, the whole hillside went up. Flames began to shoot up 4, 5 stories in the air. Blasts of hot, greasy smoke drove most of us right back into the ocean. I don't know how long I was standing in the waves when something bumped me from behind. And when I turned around, there was a man holding a lantern. "Get in, we've come to rescue you." It was an entire fishing village that had been mobilized. The captain had radioed the wrong position, so it was actually a good thing that we had lit the island on fire, because the fishing village was able to redirect itself and come and rescue us. We were taken to a small town on the north coast of Java, where, as it turned out, a newspaper article was written about us. The headline, "Ferry Trip Cursed from Beginning." The captain was interviewed. He was being fined and in danger of losing his ferry license. Indignant, he shouted, many times he had made this journey with many more passengers. The problem with this trip was that this group of passengers was particularly full of crap. What interested me was an interview with the shipmate, because I hadn't heard what he had seen in the woods. He had followed the voice to a tree where he held up the burning branch. And at the last instant, through a gap in the foliage, he had seen the open mouth of an enormous serpent, which had struck, sending burning embers throughout the woods, which had lit the island on fire. The old woman was not among those rescued by the fishing village. Yes, the headline of the article read, "Ferry Trip Cursed from Beginning." But most people reading that article did not consider us unlucky. While her name wasn't mentioned once in the article, Loro Kidu was in the backs of everyone's mind who read it. And very few encounter Loro Kidu and live to tell the tale.
Our next teller has graced the stage of the Woodland Opera House for many years. But tonight, Patricia Glass shares a story that takes us back to her earliest childhood memories of Halloween. And then she will regale us with a tale that only she knows, a personal story of the Emerald Ring.
Hello, I'm Patricia Glass, an actress at the historic Woodland Opera House. I've lived in California for over 30 years, but I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. I've noticed some differences in my Halloween experiences, and whether that's from the time period or the place, I'm not sure. And now I'd like to tell you the story of the lady with the emerald ring. A rich man's wife became deathly ill at the start of the winter in 1798, and so he called for a doctor. But by the time the doctor had arrived, his wife had died, or so he thought. The husband was so grief-stricken that he locked himself in his room and did not attend the funeral the following day. The servants of the house carried the rich woman's body to the vicar, who, in a drunken stupor, held the ceremony quickly. The veil was drawn across her face, the stone lid lowered, and the iron grill locked. Just before the clergyman fell to sleep later that night, he remembered the beautiful emerald ring on the finger of the woman he had just laid to rest. Wanting the ring, and thinking no one would find out, he went down to the basement, unlocked the lid, opened it, and tried to pry the ring off. It wouldn't budge. He ran back and brought a file to cut the ring off of her finger, but that didn't work either. So he ran and got a knife, where he severed her finger and pulled the ring off. As he left, he turned around to pick up the iron lid and screamed at the top of his lungs. He dropped the ring and ran. The woman had awakened, was moaning, and held her severed finger towards him with an evil smile on her face. Wearing her fine silk dress, the woman trudged back to her home, knocked on the door, and rang the bell to no avail. It was late, and the servants had all gone to sleep. She lifted a heavy stone and threw it at her husband's window and waited. He opened the shutters with a sorrowful look on his face. Suddenly, to her surprise, he yelled, "Go away! Why must you torture me so? Don't you know my wife has just died? Let me mourn and do not bother me again." With this, he shut the window. He did not realize it was his wife who had thrown the rock at the window. She repeated her actions, again throwing a rock at the window. He opened the window again, and she yelled to him, "I am no one but your wife, your so-called dead wife. Now come down here and open this door, unless you'd like me to die a second time on our doorstep." "You are a ghost, then?" he said to her. She said, "No, for ghosts do not bleed. Now come down here before I catch my own death of cold." The man, with a joyous look on his face, came down to meet his wife and took her inside, where he called for the doctor once more and told him the news. Meanwhile, the clergyman had run home and up the stairs. In a state of fright, he hung himself from the rafters of his home. If only he had known that the woman wanted to thank him. She had not died after all, but had gone into a coma. When he cut off her finger, the pain woke her up.
Oh dear. Dare I introduce the next teller? Are your stomachs strong enough? Are your room lights on? A nationally beloved storyteller, Jeff Gear comes to us from his hometown in Hawaii. He was born on Halloween, and as such is tied to the worlds of the scary and the eerie. And tonight's tale is no different. Get ready as Jeff Gear regales us with the story of the secret weapon.
I would like to tell you that the next story is V.S. Who. Why do I say that? Because it's very spooky. And at the end of it, you go, whew. This is a little kid's spooky story, but it's for real. With the story of the secret weapon. I was on the playground. It was about Halloween, and the kids were all talking, "What you gonna be for Halloween?" "I'm gonna be a wiener. I'm gonna be a schnitzel. I'm gonna be a fat lady." Kids. There was one friend standing by the side going like, "Hey, what you gonna be for Halloween? What gets you oogie inside? What freaks you out, brother?" "Nothing. I'm not afraid of spooky stuff. Booga booga. Pfft. That's for little kids. I'm not afraid of nothing." "Yeah, come on. What gets inside you? What makes you go oogie oogie? Is it skeletons or zombies?" "None of that stuff. Nah, I don't get scared of that stuff. That's for babies. None of me. Not me. I'm not afraid of nothing." "I tell you, I dare you, I double dare you, I triple dare you. You go by the corner of the school, then you'll see the man. You know, the tall man, he'd be all thin and all in black, and the man gonna freak you out, brother." "Ah, I'm not afraid of no spooky booga booga guy all in black. I can do it. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid." All the kids. Bell went back, kids went back into class. I told some stories. End of school. Kids were pouring out of the building. Books were flying, papers in the air. Everybody was running down the things. Moms and dads put them in their cars. Kids were filling up buses. Some kids were going to A+. The one guy who wasn't afraid of anything was standing by the corner of the school. "So, where's that scary guy, huh? Booga booga." "I'm not afraid of him." His friends were in the yard next door behind the hedge. Well, you know, an hour is a long time. 2 hours later, the janitor was going home, the principal was going down, everybody was leaving the school. The kids had never been there that long. Even A+ was closed, nobody around. And the kid who wasn't afraid of anything was like, "Oh, where's your spooky friend? I don't see that." There on the sidewalk, stretching along, there was a long shadow. It bumped into some black shoes that went up, 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 until they came together. There were long fingers there, like bones, all white. And the white hands went into black sleeves that went up, 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 joined at the shoulders, black collar, and then the face. The face had a hooked chin, flaney teeth, rounded nose, big button eyes, and on top of the head there was a black hat that went up, 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 up. The boy went. The big tall man, all in black, went, "Are you who's not afraid of anything?" "Sometimes." "Well, if you're not afraid of anything, follow me." And the boy followed. Now the big man was walking. He had such long legs as he was walking that the boy had to run to keep up. And they went left, and then they went right, and they went left. He knew the neighborhood pretty good, but pretty soon he was like, "Well, I don't even know where I am. We're going so fast." The man turned, he walked down an alleyway. The alleyway had no end. It was a dead end. At the end of it, there was a bunch of ivy, and the tall man went and turned his hand, went into the ivy, and looked back. "Are you still here, little boy?" "I'm here." "Are you not afraid?" "I'm not afraid of anything. I'm not afraid of anything." "Well, if you're not afraid, come, follow me." And the man took the ivy. He pushed it aside. He jumped inside of the ivy. And the ivy. "I'm not afraid of nothing. I'm 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 not afraid of you." He flew through the ivy and he landed. He looked around. There was fog on the ground. The fog swirled around the backside of the tall man walking. He was walking towards a big house that had strange faces looking down. And there was a big iron gate, and the man was walking. And the boy was catching. He saw stones, and on the stones there were letters and numbers. And then it occurred to him, this is the graveyard. This is where they bury the dead people. The tall man walked forward to the gate. Take your hand up like this. He pushed open the gate. You know how it sounded. Do it with me. The tall man looked back. Are you not afraid, little boy? I'm not afraid of nothing. I'm not afraid of... But if you're not afraid, follow me. And the boy followed the man, and the man went into a darker room. Now this room was dark, and the man went in, but the boy, he couldn't hardly even see his hand, but he could hear. And what he heard sounded like bats flying. Now you gotta get up your hand. Get up your hands and make like this. Come on. The bats were flying. And they were hitting him in the head a little bit. But that wasn't the scary thing. He heard the voice. Are you not afraid, little boy? The boy said, I'm not afraid of nothing. If you're not afraid, Follow me. And the man went down some stairs. He went down, 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 deeper into the ground. Now in this room, the boy followed, and he could hardly see his hands in front of his face, but he could hear. And what he heard sounded like something was tearing or ripping or something. You've got to help me. Get your hands together and go. And then the sound. Are you not afraid, little boy? I'm not afraid of nothing. Well, if you're not afraid, little boy, follow me down. And the man went downstairs, even further down. He went down, 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 down deeper into the ground. And the little boy followed. Now in this room, it was so dark that the little boy couldn't even see his hand in front of his face. But he could hear. And what he heard was like the stones in the very center of the whole center of the world were having a bad dream. Get your hands together. This is scary. The sound was like, and back behind him, he heard the sound. But that wasn't the scariest thing. No. What was really scary was the face of this thin man in black was glowing with his pinny chin, his pointy teeth, his hooked nose, his button eyes, his hat going up. And the face of the spooky man said, "Are you not afraid, little boy?" And the boy said, okay, that's enough. I'm afraid. And when I'm afraid, I use my secret weapon and get out of trouble. Do you think I care about your secret weapon? No. And now I am going to. That was enough. The boy decided, I've had it, shining face, I'm gonna. No. The boy used his secret weapon, and it got him out of trouble once again. Yes, he did. I'll show you what he did. He used that secret weapon and got out of there. He did this. He closed his eyes. He concentrated. He really needed focus, concentration. He clenched his fists. He concentrated. He used his secret weapon. He went like this. Stinky peel out. Back through the middle of the top to the outside, left, right, back to the school. He came back to the school, and the boy said, ha. You got scared by the tall man. Yeah, I got scared by the tall man, but then I used my secret weapon, and I got out of trouble. A secret weapon? Yeah, when I'm in trouble, I use my secret weapon. I used it this time. That's how I got out of there. Well, what is your secret weapon? He clenched his fists. He closed his eyes. He concentrated. And he shared with his friends his secret weapon. Now, boys and girls, sometimes it's a scary world. And in the scary world that you are a part of, sometimes you will get freaked out. Deep inside of you, you have great power. Use it wisely. Spooky.
Angela James is a Sacramento poet, artist, dancer, and storyteller that is a true performance artist. She magically mixes movement, music, and storytelling into a fusion that appeals to all ages. And when it comes to Halloween, she is the queen of spooky. Fasten your seatbelts, everyone.
Have you ever been in a graveyard in the middle of the night? Didn't think you had, and I haven't either. But when I was a little girl, I lived in a really small town, and there was a graveyard right in the middle of town next to a church. Now, everybody used this graveyard as a shortcut to go to and from school, to go to work. It was the middle of town, and it was a small town, so hardly anybody used cars. Now, we were careful only to use the graveyard in the daytime. But there was one man, Mr. Jones. He was brave. He used it at night. See, his house was right next to the church, and it was so easy to him to go back and forth, back and forth. Well, this one time, it was a few days before Halloween, and he was going home through the graveyard, and all of a sudden he heard a sound. Now he stopped because it wasn't a usual sound. It was different, and it sounded as though somebody was calling or moaning, and it sounded like, "Turn me over." Oh, Mr. Jones walked a few more steps. He heard the sound again. He stopped. He listened. "Turn me over." Well, he shook his head and he went home. But he got home and he told his family what he had experienced. His wife said, "Honey, you are working way too hard. You need to take it easy." His daughter, who was reading a book, didn't even raise her head up, and she was like, "Daddy, you have too much of a vivid imagination." And his son was, "Daddy's heard a ghost, Daddy's heard a ghost." What? He shut them all up, went to bed. The next night, going home from work, he heard the same sound. He looked around this time. He walked around a little bit, and he heard the sound. But this time, it wasn't just a moan. It was loud. "Turn me over! Turn me over!" Ooh, it was kind of scary. He started to walk real fast. When he got home, he was all hot and sweaty, and his wife said, "Honey, I'm getting a little worried here. Maybe you should talk to your boss and get a few days off." And both his daughter and his son now started chanting, "Daddy's heard a ghost, Daddy's heard a ghost, Daddy's..." Well, the next day, it happened to be Halloween. But Mr. Jones decided On the way home, he would take the long way around. But as soon as he was ready to leave his office, it started to rain. I mean, rain pouring down buckets, the wind blowing, thunder and lightning. And he said, "Oh, I'm taking the shortcut." He pulled up his coat around his shoulders and he headed off through the graveyard. And as he's going through, and the song starts again, "Turn me over." Sometimes it would be a moan, "Turn me over, please." Sometimes it would be a shriek, "Turn me over." Mr. Jones was a brave man. He said, "If there is a ghost in this place, I am going to find it tonight." So he started off in the direction of the voice. He went down this way, across that way, through the trees, around some graves. He just kept going in circles, and he kept hearing this voice. Well, finally, he's going through some trees, and he finds himself at the back of the cemetery next to the church, where there's a mausoleum. And he can hear the sound coming from inside that mausoleum. "Turn me over, turn me over, turn me over." Oh, he goes up, and there's a short gate, and he opens that gate. And he goes up that muddy path to the doors of the mausoleum. And there's a latch, there's a handle. He turns it, and it just opens like that. And he goes inside, and he finds himself at the top of a really narrow staircase. Even though it was dark, there was a light flickering at the bottom, so he could see it was a very, very narrow. So he, with stairs going down, he starts counting 1, 2, 3, 4. There were 13 steps to the bottom. When he got to the bottom, there was another door, a smaller door, and underneath the door, you could see light flickering. He touched the door, it was hot. He put one hand on the door and pushed, but it didn't budge. He took 2 hands and he put on the door and he pushed with all his might, and the door opened inwards. And the door was open, and Mr. Jones stood transfixed in the doorway. He could not believe his eyes. He was looking into a crypt where a dead body was supposed to be. But instead of a dead body, on the floor in the middle of that crypt was a huge pile of glowing red coal. The scent of light, that was the light that was coming under the door. And over those glowing red coals was a metal grate, glowing red hot as well. And as Mr. Jones looked, he looked on that glowing red grate, and on that grate, burning on that grate, in the middle of the cemetery, in a mausoleum and a crypt, on that grate was, he couldn't believe his eyes. On that grate was the biggest hamburger he had ever seen. And the hamburger was crying, "Turn me over, turn me over, please." Mr. Jones looked around the room, and in one corner he saw a spatula. He raced over to that spatula. It was so big that he had to use both hands to pick it up. And he picked up that spatula and he flipped that burger. And the burger said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you."
Brendan Spars returns with a story that made the hair on my head stand straight up. It's from an experience he had in Indonesia when he and his wife, who was Balinese, were traveling back for a family visit. Oh dear, I must say, they visited with more than just family. Hold on to yourselves. Here comes Brandon Spars' story, Possession.
The summer that I got married to a Balinese girl in Bali was also the summer I spent researching trance as part of my graduate program at UC Berkeley. I gained audience in Bali with a trance master who used trance as part of his martial arts program, for which he was extremely widely known. To my delight, he agreed to do a demonstration with several of his students. "Yeah!" he shouted as he cast a spirit into them. One of them began to writhe around violently, frothing at the mouth and hissing. Another one swayed gently back and forth. "Chook!" he shouted and commanded the spirits to leave. I was able to interview these students before and after, note all the different sensations they experienced. Then I stood up gratefully to take my leave. That was when he placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. Smiling, he took my recording device, handed it to one of his students. "Okay," he said, "your turn." I protested, but this was not a man who could be easily refused. He had me sit down, face the direction east, imagine the color white, and repeat over and over again, "Aku panggil Anggapati, aku panggil Anggapati, aku panggil Anggapati." When I returned to California, I was not the same person. Of course, I was a new husband, and my wife barely spoke any English, so she was completely dependent upon me, which placed a lot of responsibility on me. However, at least from the Balinese perspective, they might say I was not completely alone with myself in my body. You see, during the trance process, I had begun to feel very uncomfortable, and I had excused myself before the process was finished, whereas the trance master had cast spirits into his students and removed them. I had excused myself before he had removed the spirit. Some might say I was walking around with a Balinese spirit trapped inside of my body. A series of very strange episodes began, more often than not on the freeways of the East Bay. Once I was driving, giving my wife a tour of the Bay Area. I began to feel faint and lightheaded. I began gulping for air. I unbuttoned my shirt. I rolled the window down, began gasping out the window. My wife looked at me uncertainly. I stammered, "I feel funny." And she looked in her little language learner's dictionary and found the word funny. Funny. Oh, ha ha. But at this point, I felt like I was sliding down my own throat, leaving my eyes up above me with no one up there to manage the car. My wife appreciated the gravity of the situation when I had to pull over on the shoulder of the freeway. Every time I got back on the freeway, the same sensations began all over again. And ultimately, with traffic whizzing past me, trucks and cars, I phoned my brother up. He came with a friend, and they drove both cars back to Berkeley. Instead of taking me home, my brother took me to the Tang Center, which is the health center for UC Berkeley students. I began in triage. Then I was moved to the cardiology unit. Then doctor after doctor, until I eventually wound up in the psychiatric department. You weren't feeling funny, the psychiatrist said. You were feeling stress. It's manifesting itself on your driving because you are imagining yourself as a husband, as the driver of your new family. He encouraged me to find a solid object to anchor myself in reality. He had noticed I'd been fiddling with the zipper on my jacket, and he told me I should spread that over the steering wheel and zip it and unzip it over and over again the next time this happens. Well, it happened several other times, and every time it was the same thing. I would feel lightheaded and faint. I would begin to gasp for air. I'd roll the window down. I'd use the zipper. "Do you feel funny?" my wife asked. She began to build on this like a dialogue in a language learner's textbook. She added words from her dictionary like drunk and heart attack. It was the same thing every time at the Tang Center also. "You're not feeling a heart attack," the psychiatrist would say. "You're having a panic attack." He encouraged me to root my feet, control my breathing, even use a brown paper bag to keep from feeling faint. My brother once was waiting for me in the Tang Center waiting room. When I approached, he didn't stand up. He patted the seat next to him, and I sat down. He began to muse reflectively. "What's happened to you, man?" To give you a sense of what my brother is like, he's much bigger than me. His neck is the size of my waist. The core of his personality, and he'd be the first to admit this, is that he is an Oakland Raiders football fan. "What's happened to you, man? Ever since you've been married, you've been taking life too seriously." He was now waxing eloquently. "You've forgotten how to laugh, man. I'm going to give you some advice that maybe your doctors with their zippers and their bags aren't going to give you. The next time you have one of your little episodes, I want you to pop this baby in." And he handed me an old, dusty cassette tape. "This'll have you feeling right as rain." Well, the next time was on the Bay Bridge. The stakes were higher because there's nowhere to pull over. I began to feel lightheaded, faint, gasping for air. I was zipping and unzipping the zipper. I was breathing in the brown paper bag. "Do you feel funny?" my wife asked. "Yes!" I shouted. "Do you feel drunk?" "Yes!" "Do you feel heart attack?" "Yes!" I shouted. And at this point, my vision was tunneling to the size of a pinpoint. I distinctly recall vividly picturing something. Myself, back at the compound that belonged to that trance master. Only I could see myself next to the trance master, surrounded by his students. I could hear every sigh, every breath being taken by this group of students. I could hear the creak of the floor with each shift of their weight. That's when I put it together. "I think," I shouted, "I'm going into trance." And that's when I remembered the cassette, and with my last shreds of consciousness, I jammed it into the car stereo, spun the volume up to max. I knew what this cassette was right away. It was from my childhood. I was probably 8. My brother was probably 6. There was a dinner party at our house. Another family had come over, another pair of siblings. The parents were upstairs having drinks by candlelight, laughing and talking. The kids were downstairs playing. We decided to make a cassette as a joke that we would slip under the table with a lead so we could make our escape before it began to play. I knew it was this cassette from the very first raspberry being blown into the crook of someone's arm. I knew it was this cassette from the very first dramatic gasp of relief. Ah! And now this cassette was blasting on my car stereo. Ah! Ah! My wife began frantically searching for a word in her language learner's dictionary. It wasn't the cassette that did it. No. It was the expression on the woman's face as she drove past us. Traffic had been stacking up behind me as I was driving 10 miles an hour on the Bay Bridge. She had paused next to us, rolled the window down, presumably to shout some obscenity at me. Oh, what a sight we must have been. There I was, breathing into a brown paper bag. My wife was shouting, "Poo-poo! Is this poo-poo?" And of course, the symphony of flatulations was booming from my car stereo over the entire San Francisco Bay. "Oh my God," the woman mouthed. And I laughed. I laughed. And then I don't remember a single thing after that. My wife informed me later that I had straightened up, accelerated to a respectable 55 miles an hour. When I got to the Treasure Island exit, I turned off, turned the car around, and headed back into Berkeley and drove all the way to our front door. This would have all been fine, and my wife was quite pleased that I had regained control of the car. Except she began to feel very, very badly during that drive. You see, I had begun to laugh. A laugh that she had never heard me do before or since this incident. To this day, my wife is convinced that it was someone else or something else that was driving the car that day. Total dissociation. A total break with reality is what the psychiatrist said. He put me on a regimen with the hot new medication. I believe it was called clonazepam. And he assured me these episodes would be coming to an end. For good measure, I didn't drive the car on the freeways for an entire year. Now, during that year, my new bride and I went back to Bali to visit her parents. And of course, eventually I found my way back to that trance master's compound. He wasn't a bit surprised that I had returned, and he removed from me what he said had been a spirit that had been trapped inside of my body for the better part of a year. His explanation as to why it was manifesting itself on my driving was just as fascinating. Only it wasn't necessarily so much the driving that had done it. It was the direction that I was driving the car. You see, Angapati is a spirit of the East, and to be heading west was a violation of this spirit's sensibility. Indeed, every time I had had one of those episodes, I had been driving the car west.
Welcome back. And finally, for the scariest story of them all, for it happened to me. I'll tell you a true story of this place we all love, the Woodland Opera House. You see, I'm not standing here alone. Oh, no, indeed. For somewhere in the shadows, he's lurking. Let me come closer. I dare not say his name out loud for fear. For fear he may hear me. His name is William Porter. And yes, it's true. He's a ghost that's haunted the Woodland Opera House since 1892. But let me tell you my own story. I have to say I was very excited because in the year 2000, I finally came to work at the Woodland Opera House to do the show My Fair Lady, and I got one of the leads, and they showed us a picture. And this picture was of William Porter. Now, William Porter was the fireman, the only fireman who died in the fire that destroyed the theater in 1892. And he looked like a fairly good-looking gentleman with a big mustache. And we were told at the time that there is a tradition that this man haunts the theater. Well, our dress rehearsals were just about over. We were running through the show, but I didn't feel very good about two of the speeches that I was giving. And so, after one of the rehearsals, I asked the director, would it be all right if I stayed for a bit of time and worked my two speeches after everyone left? Well, the director said that's not a problem. The stage manager said they would stay. And so the rest of the company left, and there I was. The stage lights were on, the house lights were on, and I was going to do my two speeches. So the stage manager, Dan, told me, well, look, I'm going to go get a sandwich over at Ludi's while you practice, and then I won't disturb you, and I'll be back in a few minutes. I said, oh, that would be great. I'll be by myself, and I can try some things, and nobody will disturb me. So I started in to do my speeches. And I went through them the first time, and I wasn't remembering all the words. I needed to do it again. So as I started into the first speech, I got 3 lines in, and all of a sudden, I noticed up in the balcony, the door slowly closing by itself, and I heard this low creaking sound. The door came all the way shut. Well, I thought that's unusual, so I yelled up to the balcony, Dan, I know you're back. It's all right. I'm just going to continue. No answer. I didn't hear anything. So I thought, well, must have been imagining they have a loose door up there, so I'll go ahead and continue. So I started into my second speech, and I got in the first sentence, and whoosh, open comes one of the boards over the old-time windows on the first floor. All by itself, it opened and stopped right before it crashed into the wall. startled me, but I thought, well, I didn't realize there was any wind outside. I didn't think those windows opened. So I thought, that's really odd. And I started into my speech again, but I stopped. And I thought, something's wrong with that. I'm going to go close that board over the window. And so I started off the stage. I took my first step onto the stairs, and all the house lights went to black on their own. Well, I thought, come on, Dan, that's enough of that. That's enough of a joke. No sound. Well, I was becoming a little nervous at that point. I decided not to go close the window, but I went back and sat down on the couch and thought for a moment, and was about ready to do my speech one more time, and I turned and I started to go through the speech, and suddenly from stage left, I heard, I thought, okay, that's got to be Dan. He's over in stage left trying to trick me. So I thought, I'm going to creep over to that leg of the curtain, pull it back, and I'll find him. So I walked over, I grabbed the curtain really quietly, I brushed it aside. No one was there. I looked around slowly, and now I'm starting to get really worried. Something's wrong here. So I started back onto the stage, and suddenly from the other wing, I heard, right when that happened, the stage lights went out. It was now pitch black. I heard nothing. I couldn't hear any noise outside. I couldn't hear any noise in the theater. I thought, I've got to go turn these lights on. So I crept across the stage really slowly, feeling my way. I bumped into the couch, but trying not to make any sound. I crept all the way over to stage right where the light board was, and I tried to find the switch, but I couldn't find a switch that would work. All of a sudden, from the stairway at the back of stage right, I hear again, in the dark, I thought, something's back here. I've got to get out of here. Something's wrong. So I crept my way back onto the stage, felt across the furniture, and got to stage left, got to where the stairs went down to the green room, and I grabbed the banister. It was even darker downstairs. You see, my keys and my backpack were in the dressing room. The only way I could leave was to go get them. So, very quietly, silently, listening, I walked down the stairs that creaked a little bit all the way downstairs to the green room. Silence. Pitch black. I tried the switch on the lights at the bottom of the stairs. Nothing would come on. Now all I could think of is, I've got to grab these keys and my backpack, and I got to get out of here. So I started across. I knocked over some wigs that were on wig blocks. I ran into the costumes because my dressing room was on the other side of the room. I got all the way over, felt the wall, went down the wall to where my dressing room was, and opened the door slowly, trying to feel for my keys, listening, not hearing anything. And then I finally found my backpack, and right next to it, my keys, which I dropped, of course. And then I had to feel around to get them. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to walk out. I'll be fine. So I came out of the dressing room, feeling all the way, came to the middle of the dressing room where the columns were, and I had the column. And as I came around the column towards the stairway, right by the floor, there were two small red lights. And I thought, well, that's got to be the heater. That's the pilot light for the heater. It's got to be. So I started to creep towards the stairway. And as I went, suddenly, those two red lights started to go up, ascending just like that. And as they went up, they got brighter. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm either imagining something or people are playing a real trick on me. But those lights kept going and then went right to eye level. I'm holding on to the column. I can see them. Suddenly, I realized that those two red lights were right off the picture of William Porter. Okay, I'm going to go back in here for a minute. I backed away. Right as I'm backing up, I hear again. Then right after, get out. I realized what that was. I understood the words and I started to back up. I didn't know where to go. I was sweating. I was beside myself. I didn't want to make any noise, and I backed right up into the door of the restroom that's right at the corner of the green room. And I looked back and suddenly realized these two red lights were coming right at me, right at eye level. I backed up to the restroom. Those lights came right at me. Suddenly, around them, I see this figure, this outline of a figure coming towards me with these two flaming red lights right at face level. I backed up, got into the restroom, slammed the door as fast as I could, locked it, and I listened. Not a sound. I thought, oh, wait, I've got my phone. I'm going to call somebody. I go to pull my phone out. Just as I reach for it, wham! In comes the door, slamming against the wall. And there is this figure with the two right eyes right there. I backed up, I fell down, and it came towards me. And I said, I'll leave. I'm getting out. I'm leaving right now. And then I heard, too late. I said, please, I didn't mean to intrude. I'll leave immediately. I shut my eyes. I opened them just for a moment, and I saw a hand coming right towards me. I shut my eyes. It just said, too late. I shut my eyes again, and suddenly my coat was grabbed by a hand. And the next thing I heard was, Roger, did you fall asleep? And I looked up. I stood up. I was on the couch on the stage, and I looked around, and it was Dan. Weren't you going through your speeches? I looked this way, I looked that. I ran to that side of the stage, this side of the stage, but I saw nothing. I realized, oh my gosh, I'd been dreaming. Oh no. I said, well, I'm going to go ahead and leave. Well, my things were all in the front row. So I went down the stairs, grabbed my things, still trembling, while Dan went to turn off the lights, which were all on, of course. I grabbed my things. I walked up to the side exit door. Finally, I took a breath and said, oh, I was just dreaming. When suddenly I heard a door creaking shut all by itself from the balcony. I turned around and ran for my car. Thank you for coming and for joining us at the Woodland Opera House. How much fun we've had. But now that you know the stories, you can tell them to your friends. But remember, they might be true.